นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังอนุตตรังอุปัชฌายังนัมมาสามิ some water. So I'd just like to begin this evening with a few words about my own path into monkhood, into Buddhist monastic form. I grew up without any religious beliefs. I found the religious tradition in the country in which I was born as alien and baffling. I couldn't make any sense of it. It didn't mean anything to me at all. And as a child, I thought that religion meant believing in things. You had a set of things that you believed in, and then you tried to live by them. And it didn't seem to me that that was really necessary. In my teenage years, a few questions started to arise in my mind. And the major one was, what's a good way to live? Or what's the best way to live? I wasn't even sure whether that was a legitimate question, whether you can compare lives and say, that's a better life than this one, in the way that you could with material objects. But it seemed to me a question that I couldn't put down. And the other question that went round and round in my head was, why is there so much suffering in the world? Why is there so much cruelty? Why is there so much injustice? Is it just the way things are and something which has to be accepted? Or is it possible that the amount of suffering in the world could be reduced? And if the amount of suffering in the world is not a fixed thing that we simply have to make peace with, but can be reduced, then what is the responsibility of every human being towards trying to participate in that reduction of suffering? So these questions led me on a long search, mostly through reading, until eventually I came across the teachings of the Lord Buddha, and they immediately made sense to me. I had no sense that this was an exotic Asian philosophy, but it seemed obvious. There was just no not a single sentence, not a single phrase that I could reject or argue with. So at the age of 16, I think I was at that time, then I came to some early conclusions that we all suffer as human beings because of ignorance. We don't understand ourselves. We don't understand the world we live in. And that at any moment there is, or any situation, there is that basic ignorance, then craving arises, defilements arise. But that ignorance is not a fixed element of human existence. It is dependent upon a lack of education or training. And the Eightfold Path of the Buddha provides a holistic, a comprehensive, a truly effective means of educating human beings to free themselves of ignorance and all of the defilements that arise in the presence of ignorance. And it seemed to me that the best life would be one of applying oneself to the Eightfold Path, applying oneself to threefold training, in other words, to reduce and eliminate, if possible, ignorance, to realize liberation, and to share that knowledge with others. So, following on from that, I finished my schooling and worked to make some money, and then set off overland from England to India and spent a couple of years traveling, learning, experiencing things before returning to England with a dilemma. I was convinced in my mind that the conclusions that I'd drawn as a schoolboy were correct, but I still had no idea about how to put that into effect, how to lead a life based upon those principles, to be able to apply them without compromise. While I'd been traveling in Asia, I'd heard about a young Englishman who had ordained as a monk in the forest tradition. He's a very charismatic teacher who had decided to disrobe and to set up a vipassana or a meditation retreat center in England. And so I applied to participate in a 10-day course. It was the first such course I'd ever attended. And in the evening Dhamma talks, his teacher would tell stories about his life as a monk in Thailand. And suddenly it was just completely obvious to me what I'd been looking for, the way of life that I'd been looking for was the way of the bhikkhu. some months later, I joined Ajahn Sumedho's community in England and spent the Vasa of 1978 just outside Oxford, a place called Oakenhall. And following that, went to Thailand because for me, my goal, my ideal was to be a bhikkhu in a Buddhist country, in a Buddhist environment, Buddhist culture. I had no interest in propagating Buddhism in non-Buddhist countries. And I was fortunate enough to be accepted as a student by Venerable Ajahn Chah, and I became his Satimiharika, his my Upajjhaya in 1980. And I've been living in Thailand continuously since late 1978. So I can say that since I first met Ajahn Chah, since I first set foot in Wat Pah monastery, his monastery, I've never had a single thought of disrobing, of leaving the monastic order, because it seems to me that the form of the bhikkhu expresses, it contains within itself everything that I have ever wanted in my life, and it lacks nothing. It is, for me, the very best way to be a human being in this realm. As bhikkhus, we are inheritors of this wonderful tradition. It's my belief, I have no proof of this, of course, but I would think well over 90% of this is complete speculation on my part, 90% of the Arya Pugalas who have appeared in the world since the time of the Buddha have spent their lives as Buddhist monastics. So just what an honor it is to be able to live this life and to live according to the Vinaya of the Lord Buddha. In Thailand, and I think in Burma sometime, we can get quite excited about Buddha relics. And I myself love to go and pay respects to Buddha relics. But the most profound Buddha relics are the Dhamma Vinaya that the Buddha left behind for us to live our lives by. So when you think that all of the Sikkhapadas in the Patimokkha, all of the regulations that we lead our lives by, these are not arbitrary, they weren't devised by wealthy people to maintain their hold on power. Every single rule was devised by a fully enlightened Buddha. That's quite incredible to reflect upon. And if we were all fortunate enough to be offered a time machine and we were to be able to transport ourselves back to Veluwana or to Savatthi at the time of the Buddha, if we were to walk into those monasteries and we were to see Venerable Sariputta and all his disciples walking up and down, or Venerable Mahamoggallana, and we were to go over and bow to them, I think we would all be acknowledged. And they would be say, yeah, we're bhikkhus. So there is that unbroken lineage a fellow monk made a wonderful observation to me some time ago. He said, if you study human history over the past 2,500 and more years, all the upheavals and the wars and the famines and the prosperous and the unprosperous periods of humanity, all the things that have been going on throughout the world, every 15th day of that whole period, there has been communities of bhikkhus coming together and chanting the Patimokkha. You think 2,600 years in terms of Patimokkha's, how many Patimokkha's there have been? There's not been a single Patimokkha where there hasn't been a community of bhikkhus, whether it's in Sri Lanka or Burma or Thailand or wherever. There's that kind of continuity. So that's a kind of a vertical continuity, lineage. Then we have this horizontal connection. So I am being born as a bhikkhu and brought up and lived my life as a bhikkhu in Thailand, most of you in Burma. But we meet and we're immediately, we know we're part of the same Sangha. And we meet bhikkhus from Sri Lanka and Cambodia and so on. And I would say also from my experience, when we meet Mahayana monks, despite differences of doctrine, differences of Vinaya in some cases, there is again this great sense of brotherhood and community. So I think this is a wonderful thing, and that we have a part to play in the preservation of the Buddha Sasana, in the furtherance and to play a part in even the flourishing of Buddha Sasana in future. And that will come about through bhikkhus like us putting all of their hearts and minds into the study of the Buddha's teaching, into trying to put those teachings into practice in our daily life, and hopefully even to realizing the fruits of that practice. Well, there's pariyati, patipati, pativeta. This is the progression. This is the organic link between these three areas of our life. In terms of patipati and practice, there are so many different approaches these days, and many of them are like technique oriented, and we have traditions which are identified by particular meditation technique that is taught by the teacher or the founder of that tradition. My teacher was not identified with any one specific technique, although he would generally teach Anapanasati more than any other technique. But the emphasis was on the threefold training and appreciation of how that threefold training is developed in harmony. That is to say, that it's not a step-by-step process, but one in which at any one time there have to be elements of the training of conduct, elements of the training of the heart, elements of training wisdom, simply that one of those three areas of the training may take precedence, may be to the fore, and to be supported, backed up by the other two.
So in the case of sila, then at the very least we need to have the wisdom and understanding of why exactly each precept or each sikkhapada is important to keep and to take care of and to practice by. In keeping precepts, then we see how important the development of mental qualities, virtues, particularly mindfulness, sati, khanti, patient endurance, and metta. These three we can see again and again how they strengthen our practice of sila. Hiriyottappa are not fixed qualities of the heart, but they can be cultivated, they can be developed through application, particularly in the wisdom faculty, yoniso manasikara. So these three areas of the training always showing this profound interplay. We develop this practice of sila, the intention to refrain, and our ability to maintain our sila is dependent upon our wisdom, our understanding, our reflective ability, our yoniso manasikara, and dependent upon hiriyottappa, on mindfulness, on patient endurance, on metta, karuna. In our development of meditation, in which we're specifically applying ourselves to the abandonment of the unwholesome, development of the wholesome, and then keeping our precepts well, with integrity, cuts down radically feelings of regret, of remorse, mental agitation, and through keeping our precepts, we have wholesome sense of pride and a feeling of self-respect and friendship with ourselves. We like to be with ourselves. One of the many drawbacks of poor sila, or not keeping sila, is that it's very unpleasant to be with yourself. So people with poor sila tend to get caught up in all kinds of distraction to prevent themselves having to be with themselves. So sila gives us the motivation and the interest, enjoyment of being with oneself and learning how to train the mind. And the Buddha said, where there's no wisdom, there's no jhana, no wisdom, no meditation, no wisdom, no meditation. So we need to be using our intelligence to be dealing with hindrances as well, and using our reflective abilities. Wisdom, of course, itself coming when there is a firm foundation of sila and mental cultivation of all the virtues that support wisdom. So I think it's a very useful, fruitful reflection on the Eightfold Path seen as the threefold training, and that's very much the emphasis in my tradition. Talk a lot about threefold training, not so much about the Eightfold Path. But of course they're synonymous, it's just a different way of talking about the same thing. But in order to see the holistic and the interrelationship between the different aspects of the path, then the threefold training, I think, brings that out very clearly. So in terms of the practice of Dhamma and all the different techniques, one of the constant challenges for meditators and practitioners in whatever school and whatever tradition that we are following is how to create a seamlessness and a sense of continuity between what we're doing when we're sitting with our eyes closed, walking up and down, and what we're doing the rest of the day. So this distinction between formal practice and informal practice, meditation, daily life, this is a challenge for everyone. My approach to this is to suggest that a very skillful way of looking at practice of Dhamma is in terms of the four right efforts, Samma Vayama. If we, whatever meditation technique that we may be applying, we can summarize that at the beginning of the meditation, our effort is primarily to create a relationship between the mind and the meditation object such that unarisen hindrances cannot arise in the mind. So exactly how do we focus upon our meditation object in such a way to protect it from hindrances? This is the first challenge. Now, of course, that's very difficult, and it's quite likely that a hindrance will arise. And in that case, then the second of the four right efforts is required, the effort to abandon the arisen, unwholesome Dhamma. As we practice mindfulness, become stronger, we become more skilled at protecting the mind and preventing unarisen, unwholesome Dhammas from arising, then the wholesome Dhammas start to appear. We now are applying more and more clearly the third of the four right efforts. We are introducing into the mind, we are inviting into the mind, we are planting within the mind wholesome Dhammas, and particularly the Bojjhangas or enlightenment factors. As the Bojjhangas begin to appear, then our next challenge is to stabilize them, to take care of them, to develop them further. So I'd say one way we can look at meditation practice in a way that unifies all the different techniques, I would say, is to look at it in terms, rather than specific meditation objects, but to look in terms of what we're actually doing. We're actually learning very important life skills. We're learning all the skills that we need to create a relationship between the mind and the chosen object such that unarisen, unwholesome Dhammas do not arise, or in such a way that we can swiftly abandon unwholesome Dhammas that do arise. We're learning how to plant within the mind the Bojjhangas and how to take care of them and to bring them to maturity. Now, if we look at everyday life, or everything we're doing when we're not sitting with our eyes closed or walking up and down, then I would say that we are applying exactly the same right efforts, whether we're seeing to our daily chores, whether we're studying, whether we're working, whether we're on alms round, whatever we might be doing, our main effort is to prevent unarisen, unwholesome dhammas from arising and to deal as swiftly, efficiently, effectively with those that have arisen. We are looking to bring into the mind wholesome dhammas appropriate to the situation that we find ourselves in. And when they do start to arise, we recognize their presence, we're learning the skills of looking after them and bringing them to maturity. So seen through the lens of the four right efforts of Samma Vayama, we have created a bridge between meditation practices and daily life. Now in our practice then, a common question that I often receive from lay meditators or lay Buddhists in particular is, what kind of indications are there that we are progressing in Dhamma? And there are many different ways of answering this question. One very simple answer that I'm very fond of, given by a great bhikkhu who I look up to very much. He said that the number of things, if you're progressing in the Dhamma, the number of things that make you suffer should be decreasing, and the number of things that make you happy should be increasing. But if we take another way of looking at this, excuse me. I would say that just one of many points here is in our relationship to worldly dhammas, that the untrained mind is extremely sensitive to the worldly dhammas, that gain and loss are really big issues. They affect us emotionally to a great extent. Praise and blame, again, the untrained mind is incredibly sensitive to praise and blame. So gain and loss, status, loss of status, praise and blame, pleasure and pain, these are the 8 worldly winds that blow the worldly mind around. As we're practicing in Dhamma, we become less and less sensitive to those worldly winds, and you may well have had an experience where maybe somebody treats you very badly, unexpectedly accuses you of something that you haven't done, for example, and the person walks away, and you look at your heart and you realize that you're not suffering very much, and you think to yourself, wow, even a year or two ago, if somebody had treated me like that, I would have been so upset. I would maybe not been able to sleep at night. I've been so upset. But now I feel very little. I feel something, but very little. So this is one thing that can be observed. I think the best time to observe yourself is when things happen unexpectedly. And suddenly you're put in a situation, you have no time to prepare for it. And that's a real test of your mindfulness, of your equanimity, of your loving kindness, or whatever. But I would also say that at the same time, as the mind becomes very solid and there's an unmovable aspect of the mind that starts to manifest, we become very sensitive to dukkha, much more sensitive. And the suffering of others, which for the untrained mind, we tend to can be very insensitive to or turn our backs on. We don't want to have to deal with it, makes us depressed or anxious. The mind is moved by dukkha in a way that it has never been before. Earlier we were having some discussion about karuna, and for me it's significant that the Buddha realized liberation under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya through wisdom. But after the Lord Buddha had enjoyed the fruits of liberation for not so many days at all, really, considering the huge amount of effort that had preceded it, his mind turned to this question of whether or not he should teach others. And we know this story that he, for some short while at least, he started to doubt whether this teaching was too profound for other human beings to appreciate or to benefit from. And then as the story goes, the Brahma, Sahampati, came down and reassured him that there are beings with little dust in their eyes who can indeed benefit and can indeed realize the fruits of holy life in following teachings of Lord Buddha. So the Buddha got up and walked all the way to Sarnath. It's like 200 and something kilometers. And in order to teach the Panchavaki, the 5 ascetics, and then for the following 45 years, he spent nearly all of his waking moments teaching others, teaching them the path to liberation. So for me, the Buddha's wisdom manifested in compassion. And then the expressions of the Buddha's compassion over the next 45 years were guided, were molded by wisdom. The Buddha's constantly developing ways of expressing these profound truths in language, in images, in metaphors, similes, stories that will be most effective in opening people's eyes to the truth. So this very profound relationship between panya and karuna, seen in the life of the Buddha himself. That the Buddha was enlightened with wisdom, and that wisdom resulted in karuna, compassion, and motivated by compassion, the Buddha used his great wisdom and understanding to propagate the teachings that lead to freedom from suffering. So I have a number of students and friends in China these days, and monks in Vajrayana tradition. And sometimes we talk about differing approaches to metta and karuna and helping others. And my my presentation, if you like, of the Theravada way is to say that in Theravada, it's not that we don't have compassion for others, maybe don't talk about it quite so much, but our emphasis is on the helping self and others together, that the more you truly help yourself, the more you are able to help others. The more you help others wisely, the more you can help yourself. This principle goes back to the time of the Buddha himself. You remember teaching the acrobat and his helper. So to give a very simple example of this, there are many people who feel great wish to try to make the world a better place, to help to alleviate the suffering in the world, and they join organizations devoted to noble causes. But in the cases where they lack that internal culture, they're not developing themselves, they don't know how to look after their own minds, then in many cases, a year or two down the road, they get completely burnt out. And so their heroic efforts to help others are very short-lived. Or else something that we can observe quite often in groups of people devoted to helping others is that they quarrel a lot. They have a lot of arguments because it's not just for themselves that they're concerned. It's for the welfare of others. So they feel very passionate about their beliefs, and so there tends to be a great deal of ditthimana, attachment to views and opinions, which undermines the effectiveness of their work. Also commonly observed is that if you are successful at anything in the world, you're going to receive a lot of praise and blame. And if you have not developed that inner strength, an inner wisdom, then you will fall into the traps of praise and blame. So the wish to help others, that kind of compassion, lacking wisdom, can be very short-lived, and it can bring all kinds of problems when there is a lack of wisdom. So as in the Theravada tradition, what I'm saying is, like we say, you can't just give yourself to others like this kind of bodhisattva ideal. We say you have to know how to look after yourself if you really want to help others effectively over a long period of time, like 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, not just a couple of years until you get completely burnt out. So we're talking about a harmony of effort, harmonizing one's effort towards training oneself and to helping others. But as we practice in the formal sense of that word, the meditation practice, and this is sometimes portrayed as being like a selfish pursuit, then as meditators, we can only say, well, the thing that we wear away through meditation and constantly rubbing and eroding away is that sense of self and self-importance, and that the fears and anxieties and desires based upon the conceit of me and mine. So the more we practice, the less of the asmimana there is, the less of the ahankara, mamankara. We're not creating self and ideas of possession in the same way. So the less and less you take seriously this idea of me and mine, the more you look closely, it just crumbles away. It can't sustain any serious investigation. So the more that the sense of self starts to melt or to crumble, then the more the compassion for others arises, because it's not just that sense of distinction between self and others is no longer so rigid and so obvious as it was. And so it's not a sense of working to be free from my suffering, but it's suffering wherever it appears, in whatever form. There is that wish to alleviate suffering, to eliminate suffering by abandoning its causes. And to do that through practice of Eightfold Path or the Threefold Training, and to promote and to explain and to share one's understanding of that training with others. So I'm very much in harmony and in agreement with Ajahn Kamai's views on the importance of karuna. It's very much chimes with my own approach and understanding of this. Seems to me that wisdom and karuna go hand in hand, and that the wiser you are, the more compassionate you are. The more compassionate you are, if it's compassion in the sense that the Buddha was teaching, then the more wisdom we find, because it's through the recognition of dukkha, the first noble truth. Four noble truths are all to be found in that recognition, that comprehension of the first noble truth. There is dukkha. The dukkha is like the great riddle, the one thing that we need to understand. As the Buddha's enlightenment. Enlightenment is the comprehension of dukkha. So that means that apart from arahants, we don't really know what dukkha means. When we think, well, we can use the word suffering very glibly, but we don't really understand what dukkha means. This is what enlightenment is. The liberation is a true understanding of this meaning of dukkha. But the more that we look closely at the five khandhas, we look closely at this body and mind, we learn from our experiences in meditation, we learn from our experiences in the world, then the clearer and clearer it becomes. And I would suggest that the more clearly we see dukkha, that the more the compassion arises in our mind. And that's a good indication that we are on the right path. So I think I've probably spoken enough for this evening. I'd like to give opportunity for some questions and answers. Now I'd like to end my discourse at this point.